My sister ruined my wedding dress to use the fabric for her baby's christening gown without asking. When I asked why, she smirked, "You were never going to fit into it anyway." Everyone laughed, except my fiancé's mother, who stormed out and said, "This family's toxic. I'm calling off the wedding myself." But what she did next no one expected. I never imagined my wedding would fall apart over a dress. Of all the things that could have gone wrong, the venue, the flowers, the catering, none of those things ended up being the problem. It was a single, beautiful, carefully chosen wedding dress that should have made me feel like a bride, but instead became the reason I lost my family. Or maybe, if I'm being honest, I didn't lose them at all. Maybe I just finally admitted what had been true all along. It started the week before my wedding. I had spent months planning every detail, and while I knew my family wasn't particularly invested in my happiness, I still held on to a sliver of hope that, for once, they would be supportive, that my mother would be proud, that my sister, Bianca, would at least pretend to be happy for me, that they would set aside their usual dismissiveness and just this once make me feel like I mattered. That hope disappeared when I walked into my mother's house and saw my wedding dress in pieces. I froze in the doorway. The dress had been hanging in my childhood bedroom, carefully zipped inside a garment bag. I had brought it here to keep it safe. Ironic, really, considering what happened. But now, it was laid out across the dining table in a way that made my stomach drop. The bodice had been cut away. The delicate lace sleeves were gone. The flowing skirt, the beautiful beading I had fallen in love with, all of it had been reduced to scraps. And, standing over the fabric, holding a pair of fabric shears, was Bianca. She barely looked up when I entered the room. "Oh, good," she said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. "You're here." I couldn't speak. My mind was scrambling to process what I was seeing. I had imagined worst-case scenarios in my head before. Coffee spills, minor alterations gone wrong. But this wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. My voice came out in a whisper. "What did you do?" Bianca sighed and placed the scissors down. "Relax, Nora. I needed some of the fabric for Adeline's christening gown." Adeline, her newborn daughter, my niece. I barely registered the sound of my mother walking into the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said with a dismissive wave. "It's just a dress. Just a dress. Just a dress that had taken me months to save for. Just a dress that I'd spent weeks traveling to different bridal shops to find. Just a dress that was supposed to be the one thing that belonged to me on my wedding day. Just a dress that my sister had destroyed without even asking." My hands were shaking. I couldn't even find the words. "You had no right." Bianca finally turned to face me fully. There was no guilt on her face, no remorse. Instead, she smirked. "Oh, come on, Nora," she said lightly. "You were never going to fit into it anyway." The words hit me like a slap. My weight has always been a topic of conversation in my family. I wasn't overweight, but I wasn't as slim as Bianca, and in our household, that was enough to make me the subject of quiet jabs and backhanded comments disguised as concern. Bianca had always been the beautiful one, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I'd spent my entire life in her shadow, learning to accept the little crumbs of attention I was given. I didn't even realize I had tears in my eyes until I felt one slip down my cheek. Bianca rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are you really crying?" Laughter filled the room. Not just hers, my mother's, my aunt's from the living room, even my cousin Victoria, who had always played the role of the neutral bystander. They thought it was funny. They thought I was funny. The humiliation burned through me, and for the first time in my life, I felt something close to hatred. But before I could even say another word, another voice cut through the room. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" The room fell silent. I turned toward the doorway and saw her, Eleanor, my fiancé's mother. She had arrived a little earlier than expected, coming by to drop off something for the wedding, and now, she was standing there, her face twisted in barely concealed disgust. Eleanor wasn't a woman you ignored. She had the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter. A widow who had built her own business from the ground up. She was strong-willed, sharp-tongued, and fiercely protective of her son. And right now, she was staring at my family like she was seconds away from setting the house on fire. My mother recovered first, clearing her throat. "Oh, Eleanor, don't mind Nora. She's just being dramatic." Eleanor didn't even acknowledge her. She was still looking at me, and in her expression, I saw something I had never seen from my own mother: concern. She looked at the dress, then at Bianca, then back at me. And then she turned to my mother. "This family's toxic," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm calling off the wedding myself." It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My mother let out a sharp laugh. "Don't be ridiculous." But Eleanor wasn't joking. She took a step forward, and even though she wasn't raising her voice, every word she spoke carried the weight of finality. "You don't deserve her," she said simply. Then, she looked at me again, her expression softening. "And you don't have to put up with this." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And then Eleanor turned and walked out of the house. The second the front door shut, the laughter was gone. The smirks disappeared. My mother's expression hardened. What did you do? She snapped at me, as if this was somehow my fault. Bianca scoffed. Jesus, Nora. You let her think she could make decisions for you. I was shaking now, not just from anger, but from something else. Something colder. For years, I had swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every moment where I was made to feel like I wasn't enough. I had told myself that this was just how family worked. That love in my family came in the form of teasing and tough skin. But standing there, looking at my ruined dress, my mother's glare, my sister's smirk, I realized something. This wasn't love, and maybe it never had been. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my pulse pounding in my ears, my breath shallow. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails biting into my palms. No one moved. No one spoke. My mother and Bianca just stared at me, waiting for me to do what I always did. To shrink, to apologize, to swallow it down and pretend it didn't matter. But I couldn't. Not this time. The weight of years pressed against my chest. Every insult disguised as a joke. Every moment I've been pushed aside for Bianca. Every time I've been told I was overreacting when all I had wanted was to be treated with an ounce of the respect my sister was given without question. My voice, when I finally found it, was unsteady. You ruined my wedding dress. Bianca scoffed, folding her arms over her chest. Oh, for God's sake, Nora. It's just fabric. You act like I burned down your house. A dry, bitter laugh slipped from my lips, one that surprised even me. It was my wedding dress, Bianca. I turned to my mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, the one who was supposed to stand up for me. And you're fine with this? You're really okay with what she did? My mother sighed like I was exhausting her. I don't see why you're making such a big deal out of this. It's done now. What do you want me to do? Cry over it with you? Something inside me cracked. I stared at her, at Bianca, at Victoria, who was looking away awkwardly. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to pity for them. Not anger, not sadness, just pity. I had spent years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. And now, they were watching me, waiting for me to let it go, waiting for me to drop it, because that was what I always did. I took a slow breath, forcing my hands to relax. My voice was eerily steady when I spoke. I don't have anything else to say to you. Then I turned and walked out the door. I half expected someone to call after me, to say something, but the only thing that followed me was silence. I don't even remember the drive to Robert's house. The world outside the windshield blurred together, just streaks of color and movement. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, my stomach twisted in knots. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on my chin. When I pulled into the driveway, I barely had time to put the car in park before Robert was at my door. He must have been waiting, watching from the window. I turned off the ignition, but I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Robert hesitated, then opened the door and crouched beside me. Nora, he said gently, his voice cautious. Talk to me. I couldn't. I could barely breathe. He reached up and wiped a tear from my cheek with his thumb. What happened? I shook my head, swallowed hard, and forced the words out. My dress. Bianca, she. My throat closed up. I had to take a deep breath before I could continue. She cut it up. She used the fabric for Adeline's christening gown. Robert didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at me, his jaw tightening. Then after a moment, he stood and held out his hand. Come inside. I let him pull me out of the car and into the house. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in front of her. The second she saw me, her face softened, and I knew. She already knew. Robert must have told her. Or maybe she knew the moment she left my mother's house. Without a word, she stood and pulled out a chair for me. Sit. I sat. Eleanor didn't say anything right away. She simply poured me a glass of wine and placed it in front of me. Drink. I wrapped my hands around the glass, grateful for something to hold on to. Robert sat beside me, his knee touching mine. Did they even apologize? He asked, his voice dark. I let out a humorless laugh. No. They laughed. I swallowed thickly. They thought it was funny. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. She exhaled sharply through her nose, took a sip of her own wine, and then said, They're not coming to the wedding. I blinked. What? She didn't hesitate. I won't have those people ruining your day. They're my family, I said weakly, though even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes steady. Are they? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Were they? A mother who had spent my whole life making me feel like I wasn't good enough? A sister who took whatever she wanted from me without a second thought? A family that had never, not once, stood up for me? Eleanor reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You deserve better than them, Nora. I swallowed hard. Somewhere deep inside me, I already knew she was right. Over the next few days, I ignored every call from my mother, every text from Bianca. At first, they didn't seem to care, but then, when they realized I wasn't coming back, the messages changed. My mother accused me of being overly sensitive. Bianca sent a single message. Are you seriously still mad about this? Victoria sent the only text that almost made me reply. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. I stared at that one for a long time before setting my phone down without answering. I spent the rest of the week with Robert and Eleanor, planning the wedding without my family. And then, 2 days before the ceremony, my mother showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer, but something in me needed to hear what she had to say. When I opened the door, she stood there with her arms crossed, looking irritated. Not regretful, not apologetic, just annoyed. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She huffed. Are you really going to go through with this? I raised an eyebrow. With what? With cutting us out over something so stupid. I let out a slow breath, gripping the doorframe so I wouldn't slam the door at her face. It wasn't stupid of me, I said quietly. She let out a sharp laugh. Jesus, Nora, when did you become so dramatic? I clenched my jaw. When did you stop being my mother? For the first time, she faltered, just for a second. Then she recovered, straightening her shoulders. So that's it? You're just going to let some stranger come in and tell you to throw your own family away? Eleanor's words echoed in my head. Are they really your family? I met my mother's gaze, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her disapproval. And I realized I already had my answer. She was waiting for me to back down. That was how it had always been. My mother would push, I would bend. Bianca would take, I would let her. It was the dynamic of our family, so deeply ingrained that I hadn't even questioned it for most of my life. But something had changed. I had changed. I didn't step aside this time. I didn't lower my voice or make myself smaller. I just stood there, looking at the woman who had raised me, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. Not as my mother, but as a person. A woman who had always favored one daughter over the other. A woman who had never protected me, who had dismissed my feelings so many times that I had started dismissing them myself. I thought of Eleanor and how she had defended me without hesitation. How she had stood up for me in a way my own mother never had. That realization hurt more than anything. I exhaled slowly. I think you should go. My mother blinked, as if she hadn't heard me right. Excuse me. You heard me, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I'm done arguing about this. Her lips pressed into a thin line. So you're really choosing them over your own family? I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Did you ever consider that maybe you made that choice for me? For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or hesitation. But then it was gone, replaced by the same cold disapproval I'd seen my entire life. If you walk away from us now, don't expect to come crawling back later, she said. And there it was. The ultimatum. The last attempt to control. I didn't flinch. I won't, I said. She stared at me, as if waiting for me to take it back. But I didn't. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door behind her, resting my forehead against the wood. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. All I felt was empty. The next morning, Bianca called. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but some part of me, the part that still wanted to believe my sister was capable of remorse, made me answer. Her voice was flat. You're really going through with this? I sighed, rubbing my temple. Bianca, I know. Seriously, she cut me off. You're actually going to marry into a family that's turning you against your own? I clenched my jaw. No one turned me against you, Bianca. You did that yourself. She let out a short laugh. Oh, come on, Nora. You're acting like I killed the damn dress. I repurposed it. You stole it, I corrected. You cut it up without asking me. You knew what that dress meant to me, and you destroyed it anyway. Bianca sighed dramatically. You're so sensitive. The words made my stomach turn. I had heard them my entire life. Every time she insulted me, every time she pushed past my boundaries, every time I tried to stand up for myself. I was too sensitive. I was overreacting. I was making a big deal out of nothing. But it had never been nothing. I had just been trained to believe it was. I let out a slow breath. I think we're done here, Bianca. Oh, so now you're cutting me off too? She snapped, her voice laced with mockery. Jesus, Nora, you really think Robert's family is going to make up for not having us in your life? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let her words settle. And then, I realized something. They already had. I exhaled. Goodbye, Bianca. Then, for the first time in my life, I was the one who hung up first. The day before the wedding, I was standing in Eleanor's kitchen when Robert walked in. He paused in the doorway, watching me carefully. You okay? I turned, giving him a small smile. Yeah, just thinking. He walked over, wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. About what? I hesitated. My family. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. You don't have to pretend this doesn't hurt. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I know. His arms tightened around me. I'm sorry, Nora. I closed my eyes. Me too. For so long, I had thought that, deep down, my mother and Bianca loved me. That they had to, even if they didn't show it the way I wanted. But love, real love, wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel like proving your worth over and over again, only to be laughed at. It wasn't supposed to be conditional, only given when it was convenient. Eleanor had shown me that. Robert had shown me that. And as I stood there in the quiet, his arms around me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, losing my family wasn't the tragedy I thought it would be. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. Something that was actually mine. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the sun. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear Eleanor moving around, probably starting the coffee. The smell of it drifted through the air, warm and rich, but I made no move to get up. I felt strangely weightless, like I'd been untethered from something that had been holding me down for years. I was getting married today, and my family wasn't coming. It should have felt like a loss. Maybe in some ways it was. But as I turned onto my side, staring at the soft glow of the morning light filtering through the curtains, I realized I wasn't grieving. Not really. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into a family that had never made space for me. And today, I wasn't doing that anymore. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and finally got out of bed. By the time I made my way downstairs, Eleanor was already sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the newspaper, a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. She glanced up when I entered, taking me in for a long moment before nodding approvingly. "You look calm," she noted, setting her paper aside. I gave her a small smile as I poured myself a cup. "I think I am." Eleanor studied me over the rim of her mug, then nodded again. "Good." For a while, we just sat in comfortable silence. It was strange how normal this felt. I had spent my whole life treading lightly around my own mother, never fully relaxed, always waiting for the next offhand comment, the next sharp criticism disguised as motherly advice. But with Eleanor, there was none of that. There never had been. She had treated me like family from the moment Robert introduced us. No tests, no expectations, just quiet, steady support. I felt my chest tighten with something close to gratitude. Eleanor took another sip of her coffee, then placed the mug down with a soft clink. "You hear from them?" She didn't have to specify who they were. I shook my head. "No." Eleanor gave a quiet hum of acknowledgement. "I wouldn't expect them to. Not today." I swallowed, staring down at my coffee. "I don't know if I even want them to." Eleanor didn't say anything for a moment. Then, gently, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They had their chance, sweetheart." I nodded, even though I already knew that. Eleanor squeezed once more, then let go. "Finish your coffee. We got a wedding to get to." Getting ready without my mother felt surreal. I had imagined this day in my head 100 different ways. In most of those versions, my mother was there, zipping up my dress, tucking my hair behind my ear, smiling at me in the mirror. But that version of her had never really existed. And I wasn't sure why I had ever expected her to show up now, just because it was supposed to be a special day. The truth was, she had never been the kind of mother who held my hand when I was nervous. She had never been the kind of mother who brushed my hair or told me I was beautiful. She had never been the kind of mother who hugged me just because. That wasn't who she was. And today, I wasn't pretending anymore. So instead of my mother, it was Eleanor who helped me into my dress. Her fingers were gentle but steady as she fastened the back, adjusting the delicate fabric with quiet concentration. When she was done, she stepped back, tilting her head slightly as she studied me. Then she smiled. "Beautiful," she said simply. The warmth in my chest spread. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "Thank you." She just nodded, her expression soft. "Come on, let's get you married." The ceremony was everything I had wanted it to be. The venue was beautiful, an intimate garden setting, sunlight filtering through the trees, soft music playing in the background. My closest friends were there, along with Robert's family, all of them smiling, all of them here. I should have been thinking about my mother. I should have been thinking about Bianca. But as I walked down the aisle, my heart hammering in my chest, all I saw was Robert waiting for me at the end of it. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about who wasn't here. I was thinking about the people who were. The reception was small but warm, filled with laughter and clinking glasses and quiet, happy conversations. At one point, as I sat beside Robert, my hand in his, Eleanor leaned over and whispered, "Are you happy?" I looked around the room, at the people who had chosen to be here, at Robert's hand in mine, at the life I had chosen for myself. And I realized I didn't even have to think about my answer. I turned to Eleanor, my chest light for the first time in years. "Yes," I said. "I really think I am." The first message from my mother came late that night. I was still in my wedding dress, barefoot now, sitting on the edge of the bed as Robert showered. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something in me needed to see what she had to say. I reached for my phone, my heart thudding as I opened the message. It was short. "You made your choice. I hope you don't regret it." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Not congratulations. Not I'm sorry. Just another manipulation. Another attempt to make me doubt myself. I read the message twice. Then, slowly, I set my phone down. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the message. It wasn't surprising. Of course, my mother wouldn't apologize. Of course, she wouldn't acknowledge what she had done. That wasn't how she operated. Instead, she wanted me to doubt myself, to second-guess everything, to feel like I had made a mistake. But I hadn't, and I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. I picked up my phone, hovered over the message for a moment, and then, without hesitation, I blocked her number. Then I did the same to Bianca. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It wasn't made out of anger or spite. It was just necessary. For years, I let them dictate how I felt about myself, how much space I was allowed to take up in the world. They had belittled me, dismissed me, treated me like an afterthought. And I had let them. Not anymore. I set my phone down and let out a slow breath. The sound of the shower shut off, and a few minutes later, Robert walked into the room, a towel slung around his waist, his hair damp. He paused when he saw me, his brow furrowing slightly. "You okay?" I met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I smiled. "Yeah." Robert studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good." He walked over, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Because we're officially married, Mrs. Carter." I laughed, warmth spreading through my chest. "We are." And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about the future. It took 3 months for Bianca to reach out again. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My phone rang unexpectedly one afternoon, flashing an unknown number, and for some reason, I answered. The second I heard her voice, I regretted it. "Nora," she said, her tone brisk, businesslike. "I need a favor." I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, after cutting them out of my life completely, this was how she reached out? Not with an apology. Not with even a hint of remorse. But with a request. "I don't think so," I said flatly. Bianca sighed, irritated. "It's nothing big. I just need you to co-sign something for me." I blinked. "You what?" "I need a co-signer for a car loan," she said, as if this was a completely normal thing to ask the sister she had humiliated and discarded. "Mom can't do it." And I figured. I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "You figured? After what you did to me, you figured I'd just help you." Bianca made a noise of impatience. "Oh my God, Nora. Are you seriously still holding a grudge?" My grip on the phone tightened. "You stole my wedding dress. You destroyed it. You laughed in my face and told me I wasn't going to fit into it anyway. And now you think you can just call me out of the blue and ask for a favor?" She huffed. "I didn't steal it. I repurposed it." That was the final straw. I let out a slow breath, my voice calm, collected. "Bianca." "What?" "I wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire." And then I hung up. I didn't block her number. I wanted her to try again. I wanted her to see my name on her phone, to know I was choosing not to answer. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not fighting, not getting dragged back into their chaos. Just living my life without them. And never letting them have a piece of me again.